Good afternoon. I'm going to talk about the out-of-school experience and particularly about some of the impact data that we're developing in our project, which is one of the NSF-funded climate change education partnerships. And our focus is on using interpreters at informal science institutions, particularly zoos and aquariums, as kind of the key influential audience that we can train to really shift the discourse on public discourse on climate change to be more productive and less polarized, more creative and more solutions focused than it is today. You can see our collaborators range from climate scientists to social scientists and informal education practitioners, basically our realization is that we have this opportunity in institutions like ours of an audience that's really already primed for what we want to do. Almost 3/4 of visitors to zoos and aquariums and museums agree that climate change is the most important environmental issue that we face. And about that same percentage believe actually that zoos and aquariums can and should make recommendations for how to help. So that's kind of what we're sort of building on. And the idea is to use the interpreters at these institutions to bring them in for training so they can go back and train others, building on what we know about the people who come, the science of climate change and the social science of climate change communication. And so we have a theory, and this is sort of the logic model kind of wiring diagram that I'm not going to go into in detail, but basically we have on the left side kind of the inputs, the sort of collaborators and sort of knowledge we're building on. In the middle, the project activities, and on the right-hand side, the outcomes. And the idea is the arrows lead from the left to the right, and wherever you see a little kind of seashell, those represent points where we can actually collect some data, some evaluation data to kind of prove our case. And so this is the theory, but how do we know how it's working or whether it's working? So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the indicators of success, and there's actually a number 7 that I'll mention a little bit at the end where the data is pretty preliminary, but encouraging. So really what we're trying to do is follow the impact from the direct impact on the interpreters that are in our training program to how they actually go back to their zoos and aquariums and so on and put that into practice, then how that influences those that they train and those they interact with socially in their professional networks, how the impacts spread to visitors, and how we're also kind of building this network, this community, and in kind of increasing the demand for the strategic communication approach that we're offering. So I'm going to kind of go through those in a little bit detail, not a lot, and this is summarizing a lot of evaluation data. So we know that between pre-training on the left-hand side and post-training on the right-hand side, interpreters' knowledge is shifting toward the right going toward 100% correct on climate science knowledge. Not perfect, but moving in the right direction, which is a good sign. So we know our interpreters are getting more knowledge. We also know that they're becoming more confident. And this turns out to be very important because feeling energized about talking about climate change and feeling hopeful about what they can do is a really important predictor of whether people actually do anything, because feeling demoralized and feeling depressed and feeling overwhelmed isn't a very good precursor to action. So that's one of the things that we're finding is a really important indicator, and I'll talk a little bit about how that sense of hopefulness and self-efficacy actually is something that gets transmitted and kind of radiated from interpreters to those that they interact with. So what we also find, fortunately, is that when people leave training, they tell us that they're doing more talking about climate change in kind of their everyday work, in interactions with colleagues, in professional interactions when they're working with other colleagues in the Zoo and Aquarium Association and other organizations. So we see that from pre to post, they're actually increasing their behavior of putting climate change communication into practice. And then this slide is really about the radiation piece that I was mentioning. So what you see in the orange is talking about climate change to coworkers, and in the blue bars talking about climate change to friends or family. And kind of as expected, there's more activity in communicating professionally than communicating socially, but there still is this residual effect that when you train people, even in their professional lives, they talk about what they're doing to people they interact with socially. And that also turns out to be important. If you think about the amount that we're investing in each of these interpreters, it's a fair amount of resources. So it's really good that they're kind of maximizing that. So we see that they're talking more about climate change and ocean acidification. That's the top graph. A little more about climate, a little less about ocean acidification, and they're doing it in ways that really cut across promoting understanding, as well as talking about what people can do and so on. So that's a positive sign as well. And then the next level of kind of this chain of evidence is, so what's the impact on visitors? And what we do is we survey visitors both pre-training and post-training at the various institutions that we're working with, and are finding that yes, in fact, post-training visitors are reporting they're hearing more about climate change, that interpreters are providing very clear information, and the use of metaphors is a very particular technique that is part of our training program, and we're seeing an increase in that uptake as well. We're hoping to get more data on this. Over time, every 6 months we have a couple of new groups that we train, and we have about a 6 to 9 month lag in the data, so we're still kind of catching up on collecting this data. And one of the things that we're finding is that we keep improving the training, so we're hoping to see these impact data improve over time. And then, we also see that among the interpreters that we've trained, there is kind of this self-generated sense of community and mutual support, and that does continue beyond the training and really needs to continue to support the ongoing implementation and ongoing support that's needed. And I talked about that earlier in a talk this morning. What's great is that we're beginning to see not only that people are participating, but we're beginning to see emerging leadership and kind of evidence that some of these activities among the community are happening really without any stimulus from us, and so they're more likely to be sustainable, which is great. And then what we're also seeing is an increasing demand for the work that we're doing. And this is a map of the institutions that we've reached through the present. So there are about 75 or 80 or so that are scattered around the country, ranging from zoos and aquariums that are in the blue, and green. Also, there are national parks and other kinds of interpretive locations that are involved as well. And the potential reach is probably around maybe 250 or so institutions. Our target is in the next couple of years to go from about the 75 or 80 now to about 150. So we're about halfway there. And what we're finding is that we're consistently seeing higher demand for the training programs than we can provide, which is a good sign. And ultimately, what we'd like to see is really an increased demand for public science communication. And I think that's something that is really not just a goal that's related to climate change, but it's related to the fact that in today's world, people really need to have an appreciation and understanding of science in order to be effective citizens, and that's really kind of at the heart of our approach, is really thinking about how to approach people as citizens who need to participate in important social issues. So what we're also beginning to see, and I'll just mention this without giving a lot of details because the data is still preliminary, but the way I think about our research approach is it's kind of, if you think about it, is we are introducing we're introducing something into the field, and if you think about it in a health metaphor, the communications research we do is really kind of like bench research. We're testing things out in the lab, testing communication strategies out in the lab. And then we take them out into the field and we train people on how to use these new techniques, and then they apply them in the field. And then we're looking for evidence, as I was talking about earlier, by looking at the different, the kind of transmission of some of these ideas from interpreters to the folks that they interact with, and that's kind of looking at the kind of the spread. And then what we're also doing, which is really interesting, is kind of an epidemiological study where we're just doing a public survey, going out and surveying the public, asking them whether they've been to a zoo and aquarium, whether it's one of the ones that we've been involved with in training or not, and then look at the impacts or look at the behaviors that people are showing and the attitudes that they have. And what we're beginning to see is there actually is some differentiation among those three audiences, that those who don't go to zoos and aquariums and museums tend to be less informed, less concerned, less inclined to be doing behaviors that are solution-oriented around climate change. And then we see this kind of gradient of hope and self-efficacy, with the least hope and self-efficacy sense among those who aren't visiting anywhere at all, and then a little bit more among those who are visiting a zoo, aquarium, or a museum, maybe a little more predisposed, and then even more sense of hope and self-efficacy for those that are visiting institutions that are part of our program. And you can't attribute all of that to cause and effect, but it is really suggestive that it's kind of moving in the right direction, and we'll have more data on this again in a couple of years to kind of see how that shifts. And ultimately what we're after is not necessarily running this program forever and ever, but really leaving some kind of core infrastructure in place. And part of that is what we call the core story, which is really the kind of essence of the communication strategies, and then a set of materials that go along with it, as well as the kind of human resource infrastructure of these interpretive leaders that we've trained, and kind of the community that they have formed that is now persisting both online and in person. And then all of the research and evaluation work, which I've given you a little bit of a window into, as well as a cadre of trained scientists who we work with, and potentially a model for addressing other topics beyond climate change. So this is kind of where we're thinking about trying to get to in the next couple of years, and more to follow. So I'll quit there, and I think we have a minute or two for questions.
Questions for Billy?
Let's get a flip to that.
Yes.
I was curious, when you talk about talking about climate change, if you could put that in context, is that about the impacts on the ecosystem, or is that are you teaching them about say the energy budget of the Earth, or what is the material in their courses focused on?
So to summarize, 100 hours of training in 60 seconds, I'd say that a lot of the content needs to be customized for the exhibits and context in which people are interpreting, but we focus on about kind of 5 or 6 key communication elements, including having a really kind of even-handed tone and approach to help cue kind of universal values that kind of cut across a fairly wide range of the population. So, for example, stewardship would be one value that really works. To use metaphors to explain the science. In using math whenever we use numbers, to really put numbers in context and make comparisons that are meaningful to folks, and to be very solutions oriented, and particularly toward solutions that are really collective and group oriented as opposed to individual, and citizen oriented as opposed to consumer. So those are a bunch of the things that we focus on, and we actually have a rubric that we use when people are doing presentations to help kind of evaluate how they're doing against that, and I can give you more information if you'd like after.